Welcome to the Economist in Your Ear podcast.
hmm
How does a revolutionary digital retailer go from being the unstoppable $100 billion king of fashion to losing three-quarters of its value just as it prepares to go public?
Yeah, it's a huge question.
It really is.
Mm.
I was reading through this incredible article titled How Shein Came Crashing Down, and the sheer scale of the whiplash here is staggering.
Oh, absolutely.
Like they went from being this seemingly invincible king of the $3 blouse to just bleeding money. And the reasons why are this wild, complex mix of, fierce copycats and massive shifts in international trade laws, and really just the brutal reality of trying to sell cheap clothes on a global scale.
Yeah, and I think it serves as a real-time stress test of global e-commerce. We often look at these digital giants and we just assume their growth is like a law of physics.
Right.
Like we assume that once you hit a certain velocity, especially a valuation of $100 billion, you are too big to fail, or at least,
Right.
too big to suddenly stall out.
Yeah, you figure they've got it all figured out by that point.
Exactly. But when we pull back the curtain on this specific retailer, we get this masterclass in how fragile a supply chain can be when the environment shifts even just a few degrees.
So true. But before we dissect the crash, we really need to understand the mechanics of how this company became so dominant in the first place.
Right. We have to look at the anatomy of Shein's original machine.
Yeah. For anyone who hasn't been paying attention to global retail, Shein is an online fashion giant. They have Chinese roots, though they are currently headquartered in Singapore. And for a solid few years, they completely rewired the global apparel market. But how did they actually do it? Because I know traditional fashion is all about, seasonal collections, right? Like guessing what people will want for the fall or spring.
Yeah, and that traditional model is essentially a massive high-stakes casino.
A casino.
Yeah, if you are a legacy fashion brand, you have teams of designers and trend forecasters, and they are trying to predict what a teenager in Ohio or, a young professional in Berlin is going to want to wear 9 to 12 months from now.
Which seems impossible to guess.
It really is. But you commit to those designs, you manufacture hundreds of thousands of garments in bulk, you put them on boats, and you distribute them to brick and mortar stores.
Okay.
And if your forecasters guessed wrong, you are suddenly sitting on millions of dollars of unsold inventory.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the only way to get rid of it is to slash the prices, which completely crushes your profit margins.
It sounds incredibly inefficient. So Shein just basically opted out of the guessing game entirely.
Completely. They bypassed it by building a system that's fundamentally rooted in real-time surveillance of consumer behavior.
Real-time surveillance.
Yeah, they don't try to dictate trends. They wait to see what consumers are already interacting with online. They scrape data, they monitor social media, and they utilize these massive supplier networks, primarily concentrated in China, to react to that data instantly.
And the numbers in the article illustrating the scale of this reaction are almost hard to comprehend. We are talking about over 2 million distinct items of clothing available on their platform. 2 million.
It's staggering.
And they add 4,700 new items every single day.
Right. And let's break down the mechanics of how that daily volume is even physically possible. Because they use a strategy often referred to as speed to scale.
Okay.
When their data indicates a potential trend, maybe a specific cut of a dress is getting traction on social media, they design a version of it and send the specifications to one of thousands of small hyper-connected workshops in their Chinese supply network.
So they don't use giant factories for this part.
No, they use these small workshops, and they only ask for a tiny production run. Maybe 30 to 50 pieces.
30 to 50 pieces.
Yeah.
So the financial risk is basically zero.
Exactly. Oh, well, let me rephrase that the financial risk is effectively distributed. If they put those 50 pieces on the app and no one clicks, they drop the design.
Right.
They lose a negligible amount of money on a few yards of fabric. But if the data shows users are clicking and saving and purchasing that item, Shein's proprietary software automatically pings the manufacturer to immediately scale up production.
Wow.
The algorithm just tells a factory we need 500 more by tomorrow and 5,000 by next week. It is a purely reactive loop.
I look at this process and it reminds me of software developers doing A/B testing on an app.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Yeah, like when a tech company rolls out a new update, they might throw dozens of slightly different colored buttons or menu layouts at the users.
Right.
And they monitor the user data in real time, and they only keep the buttons that people actually click on.
Right.
Shein is doing that exact same thing, but instead of digital buttons on a screen, They're doing it with physical cotton and polyester.
Yeah, I would push that analogy even further, actually, because software testing is virtually frictionless.
Right.
You change a line of code and it deploys globally.
Sure.
Shein managed to impose that digital frictionlessness onto the physical manufacturing world.
Which is insane to think about.
It really is. They organized a highly fragmented, chaotic web of thousands of independent sewing workshops and integrated them into a single, centralized digital dashboard. They made a physical supply chain behave almost like a server farm.
And the reward for building that system was a customer base of 280 million people worldwide.
Yeah.
But one detail that jumped out at me from the article is that this massive global footprint notably excludes China itself.
Right.
Like, they do not sell their wares in their own original backyard. Instead, they focus entirely on the West and other international markets. And those 280 million customers order an average of 4 times a year.
The hook for those consumers is really straightforward, though. It's the price point.
Yeah, the $3 blouses.
Exactly. Blouses for $3 and khakis for $5. It taps into a psychological reward system. A consumer can spend an hour scrolling through an endless feed of hyper-targeted garments and fill an entire virtual shopping cart for the price of one single item at a traditional mall retailer.
And that combination of endless, algorithmically curated variety and rock-bottom prices is what led investors to assign them a peak private market valuation of $100 billion back in 2022.
Which was an astronomical figure. At
Yeah.
that moment in time, investors really believed Shein had permanently solved the retail puzzle. But we have to make a crucial distinction here between a private market valuation and what happens when a company actually goes public.
Right, because it's not the same kind of money.
Not at all. A $100 billion private valuation is essentially a negotiated consensus among a small room of venture capitalists and early backers.
Okay.
It is heavily influenced by hype, the fear of missing out, and these projections of infinite future growth.
Yeah.
It is a very different beast than the public stock market, where thousands of institutional and retail investors scrutinize your actual audited books.
Which brings us to the present day and the crash, and really the sheer financial reality of stepping out of that private room. Because Shein is currently planning an initial public offering, or IPO, to relist on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange on August 31st.
Aye.
And the article points out this is reportedly a conditional listing valuing the company at just $27 billion. I mean, that is a 75% wipeout from its peak.
And a recalibration of that magnitude is a shock to the system. It means the broader financial market looked at the internal mechanics of the company and decided the original hype was fundamentally disconnected from reality.
So let's get into the math of why the market is punishing them so severely. Because the revenue trajectory outlined in the article paints a very tense picture.
It does.
In 2024, Shein generated $39 billion in revenue. That was a 21% increase from the year before, which sounds incredibly healthy.
Right, very strong.
Then in 2025, sales grew again, hitting $42 billion. But that represented only an 8% increase. So the growth rate is shrinking. And then we hit the present day, and in the first quarter of 2026, their sales increased by a meager 1% year on year.
Yeah, we have to unpack the difference between absolute revenue and revenue growth, because this is the specific metric that terrifies investors.
Okay, break that down.
Generating $42 billion in top-line revenue is objectively a colossal achievement. Most companies would kill for that volume.
Oh, yeah.
But when you are priced as a disruptive tech retail hybrid, investors are not buying your current sales figures. They are paying a premium for your trajectory.
Because they expect you to take over the entire world, not just a portion of it.
Precisely. Or rather, they expect your customer acquisition to compound indefinitely. So when your growth rate decelerates from 21% down to 8% and then grinds to a near halt at 1%, the narrative breaks.
So it's like hitting a wall.
It signals to the market that you have likely tapped out your core demographic. The engine is stalling. And if you can't grow your top line quickly, the only way to justify a massive valuation is to show massive profit margins on the sales you are making.
And that is where the floor completely falls out. Because according to the article, the company reached a net profit of $3.4 billion in 2024, a solid profit. But today, they are currently operating at a loss.
And bringing in tens of billions in revenue is meaningless if your operational costs consume all of it.
Right.
The transition from a $3.4 billion profit to a net loss is the primary catalyst for that 75% drop in valuation. The fallout has been so severe that the article reports Shein has been forced to pay settlements to their early private investors.
We really?
Yeah, essentially compensating them for the massive paper losses they suffered as the valuation collapsed.
Okay, I have to stop you here and ask the obvious question. Because if you are sitting at home reading this, you're probably thinking, wait, if they're still moving $42 billion worth of merchandise, how on earth do they go from making a huge profit to bleeding money in roughly 24 months?
It doesn't seem to make sense.
Right, it's not like teenagers suddenly stopped buying cheap clothes.
No, that is the core mystery of the article, and the answer requires looking at two massive external forces that hit Shein simultaneously.
Okay.
The first force is the arrival of heavily armed rivals, and the second is a sudden drastic change in global trade rules.
Let's tackle the rivals first.
Sure. So Shein proved that this algorithm-driven, ultra-fast, direct-from-China model works brilliantly. But when you prove a new business model is that lucrative, you inevitably attract competitors with very deep pockets.
It is the ultimate curse of success. You map out the territory and everyone else follows the map.
The economists refer to this dynamic through the lens of network effects and imitation. You see, Shein spent years educating the Western consumer to accept waiting a week or two for a package in exchange for dirt cheap prices.
Right, we all just got used to it.
They built the appetite. And the moment that appetite was proven, tech and retail heavyweights decided they wanted to capture it without having to do the hard work of creating the market.
And the heavyweights listed in this article are formidable. First up is Temu, which launched in America in 2022 by the Chinese e-commerce giant PDD.
Right.
And Temu utilizes a nearly identical low-price strategy, aggressively marketing cheap, direct-from-factory goods to Western consumers. Then in 2024, the apex predator of e-commerce enters the arena, which is Amazon.
Oh, yeah.
They launched Haul, their own ultra-cheap shopping tier. And finally, you have TikTok entering the fray with TikTok Shop.
And TikTok's expansion into e-commerce is arguably the most dangerous threat to Shein's bottom line.
Why is that one the worst?
Because TikTok isn't just an app, it is the cultural town square for the exact young demographic that Shein relies on for its sales.
Oh, that makes sense.
By launching TikTok Shop, they allowed users to buy products directly within the video feed. They turned entertainment directly into a point of sale. And the article notes the devastating result, which is that TikTok Shop has already overtaken Shein in U.S. sales.
I'm trying to picture the financial impact of this. It's like you discover a massively profitable gold mine out in the wilderness, right?
Okay.
And for a few years, you were the only one out there digging, so you reap all the rewards. But then your success makes the front page of the newspaper.
Right.
Suddenly, the biggest, most well-funded mining conglomerates in the world set up their camps right on your border. The amount of gold in the ground hasn't changed, but now it's being split 3 or 4 ways, all while your daily costs to run your own mining equipment remain exactly the same.
I'd take that analogy a step further, actually. Imagine the new miners showing up brought massive industrial excavators while you are still heavily reliant on a fleet of workers with pickaxes.
Oh, wow.
That is what Amazon brings to the table with its unparalleled global logistics network. And TikTok brings an entirely different weapon, which is captive attention.
Right, because Shein has to actively go out and find its customers.
Yes. Think about customer acquisition cost. Shein has to spend billions of dollars on digital advertising, buying ads on Google, on Meta, and ironically on TikTok, just to drive users to their app.
Yeah, they have to pay for all those clicks.
Exactly. TikTok doesn't have to pay a middleman to find those users.
Uh-huh.
The users are already on the app watching videos for 3 hours a day.
Right.
So TikTok's cost to acquire a shopper is structurally lower.
Which changes everything.
So when consumers suddenly have 3 or 4 apps offering a $3 blouse, Shein loses its pricing power. To defend their market share, Shein has to increase their marketing spend exponentially while simultaneously offering steeper discounts to match Temu's aggressive pricing.
So they're spending more to make less.
That brutal combination of skyrocketing ad costs and forced price cuts is exactly how a $3.4 billion profit margin gets entirely vaporized.
It is a total squeeze from the competition. But even with all of that, we haven't touched the second major force squeezing their margins.
Yeah, the regulations.
While Temu and Amazon were stealing their customers, international governments were simultaneously changing the physical rules of how those $3 blouses cross borders.
This is huge.
Let's talk about this regulatory wall, because the article points out the closing of a specific tax loophole in America and the European Union last year, known as the de minimis rule.
And the closure of the de minimis loophole is a massive structural blow to their entire operational model.
Okay.
To understand why, you have to understand how international shipping actually works at a port.
I think most people just click buy now on their phone and never once think about the physical journey of a cardboard box.
Very true. Historically, customs agencies were just overwhelmed with international mail. To save customs officials from wasting time and resources calculating minor tariffs on, a $20 souvenir, someone mailed to their cousin governments created the de minimis threshold.
Which did what exactly?
It allowed imported packages valued under a certain dollar amount to enter the country completely free of duties and often with far less rigorous customs inspections.
And Shein looked at that quaint rule meant for grandmothers mailing sweaters and built a $100 billion empire on top of it.
They weaponized it. Traditional clothing retailers, like a Gap or an H&M, import their garments by filling massive shipping containers and sending them on cargo ships.
Right.
When a container full of $1 million worth of jeans hits a port in Los Angeles, the retailer pays a hefty import tariff to the government.
But Shein bypassed that entirely.
Completely. They shipped millions of individual low-value packages directly from their Chinese factories to individual consumer doorsteps in the West.
Oh my gosh.
Because each tiny package only contained a few cheap items, every single shipment fell under the de minimis threshold. They were legally importing billions of dollars of goods without paying the massive bulk tariffs their competitors were paying.
So when the US and the EU closed that loophole last year, they effectively yanked a foundational pillar out from under Shein's pricing strategy.
Exactly.
But the article points out it is even worse than just losing the loophole. They are also facing the imposition of higher tariffs on Chinese goods levied by the second Trump administration.
Right, it's a double hit.
So they lost the duty-free pass for small packages, and the broader national tax on the goods inside those packages went up at the exact same time.
It creates a devastating math problem for their profit margins. I mean, when you are selling a pair of khakis for $5, your margin for error is measured in pennies.
Yeah, you're not making much per item.
You are relying entirely on the sheer volume of sales to make a profit. So if new customs duties and national tariffs suddenly require you to pay an extra $1.50 just to legally bring those khakis across the border, your profit doesn't just shrink, it goes negative.
Wow.
You are forced to make an impossible choice. You either absorb that tax and take a permanent financial loss on every item you sell, or you raise the price to $6.50.
But if they raise the price, they lose the one thing that makes them special. The customer will just open the Temu app or Amazon Haul and buy it for $5 there.
And we are seeing the direct consequence of this impossible choice in their regional performance.
Yeah, what does the article say about that?
The article highlights that Shein's revenue generated in America fell from almost 30% of their total sales in 2023 down to around 23% in the first 3 months of 2026.
I have to admit there is a profound irony in all of this.
How so?
You read about Shein, and it is framed as this sprawling, hyper-modern, algorithmically invincible tech juggernaut. But it turns out their $100 billion valuation was heavily dependent on a mundane, obscure postal rule that was originally designed to make life easier for bored customs inspectors.
It is a sobering reminder of how vulnerable disruptive business models can be.
Yeah.
Many tech retail hybrids rely on a temporary alignment of perfect conditions, cheap global shipping rates, zero tariff loopholes, and a lack of serious digital competition.
And when those go away...
Exactly when the macroeconomic weather changes, the structural flaws in the foundation become painfully obvious.
Which forces the company into defensive maneuver.
Yeah.
They can't just sit there and bleed money, so they have to pivot.
Right.
The article explores how Shein is attempting to adapt to this new reality, specifically by trying to physically move their supply chain. They are reportedly exploring manufacturing partnerships outside of China to dodge these tariffs. Most notably, they established a partnership last year with the massive Indian conglomerate Reliance, with the goal of producing clothing for both the local Indian market and international sale.
On paper, this is the textbook response. If the tariffs are targeting Chinese exports, you diversify your supply chain. You move production to a country like India to bypass the penalties.
Yeah, makes sense.
But we need to separate the public relations strategy of announcing a partnership from the bruising physical reality of actual supply chain diversification.
Hold on, I want to challenge that, because if I'm a casual investor reading the news, I see Shein partnering with a titan like Reliance in India, and I think, great problem solved.
Right.
They are making clothes in India, and now the China tariffs don't matter anymore. Why is the market still panicking if they have this escape hatch?
Because an escape hatch isn't a working engine. Remember how we described Shein's original success?
The digital dashboard and the small workshops.
Exactly. They didn't just buy clothes from China. They spent a decade meticulously tuning a highly specific, hyper-fast network of thousands of small, agile suppliers.
Right.
That network is deeply integrated with local dye houses, fabric mills, and logistics hubs, all communicating seamlessly through proprietary software. You cannot simply copy and paste a decade of tuned infrastructure into a new country overnight just because you signed a contract with Reliance.
Because the physical ecosystem doesn't exist yet in the new location.
Exactly. Well, sorry, to be more precise, the ecosystem exists, but it operates on entirely different rhythms.
Oh, I see.
If you move production to India, you have to train hundreds of new factories on your software. You have to source local raw materials or deal with the cost of importing Chinese fabric into India just to sew it there.
That sounds incredibly complicated.
It is. You have to establish brand new shipping routes. It introduces massive complexity, it dramatically increases lead times, and most importantly, it raises operational costs in the short to medium term. The friction of moving a supply chain that massive is immense.
And this brings us back to the brutal reality of their upcoming IPO.
Yep.
Because the article points out a glaring omission here. Shein's IPO prospectus is almost entirely blank on the topic of this supply chain diversification.
It's just not there.
They aren't providing any hard data on how much production is actually moving to India, or how quickly this transition is supposed to happen.
Which is deeply problematic when you're asking the public market for $27 billion. An IPO process strips away the PR spin.
Yeah, they can't just talk their way out of it.
When you file a public prospectus, it is a legally binding document. You have to disclose your verifiable financial health, your concrete structural risks, and your actual operational plans to mitigate those risks.
Right. If I am an institutional fund manager and I'm being asked to buy into this IPO, I'm going to look at that blank section in the prospectus and see a massive red flag.
Oh, absolutely.
They are asking me to fund their survival, but they refuse to provide the map for how they actually plan to survive the new tariff regime. A press release about Reliance is nice, but if the legally binding document is silent, I have to assume the Indian supply chain is barely functional yet.
And that profound skepticism likely explains why Shein has had such a long, wandering road just trying to get this IPO off the ground.
They've been trying for a while, right?
They spent years shopping themselves around to various global stock exchanges. Initially, they planned to list in New York, which is usually the ultimate destination for any company claiming to be a global tech disruptor.
Right, that's the big leagues.
But they abandoned that plan amid intense political and regulatory pushback in the U.S. Then they flirted heavily with London, and the article notes they even secured regulatory approval there in April of last year.
But they walked away from that too.
They ultimately walked away from that too.
And now they are settling for Hong Kong. It doesn't exactly project confidence. It paints a picture of a company desperately venue shopping, looking for a stock exchange that will accept its terms and overlook the massive mounting challenges in its business model.
It is an incredibly defensive posture for a company that just a few years ago was dictating the future of retail.
Yeah, it's a huge shift.
The Hong Kong listing feels less like a triumphant public debut and more like a necessary maneuver to secure capital while they try to rebuild the engine mid-flight.
So synthesizing everything we've pulled from this article, what is the ultimate takeaway? Because the core issue clearly isn't that Shein is going to go bankrupt and disappear tomorrow.
No, not at all.
Even with all these problems, they are still generating over $40 billion a year and serving hundreds of millions of customers.
Exactly. They are massive.
The underlying question is whether the original DNA of the company, that hypergrowth, frictionless model that justified a $100 billion valuation, can actually survive in a totally new reality.
Right.
Because they are now swarming with heavily armed competitors like Amazon and TikTok, and they are boxed in by a formidable new wall of international tariffs and closed loopholes.
The landscape that allowed their initial explosion has fundamentally and permanently changed. The loopholes are shut, the competition is awake, and the global supply chain is fracturing.
It's a whole new world.
It really forces us to consider a broader implication based on everything outlined in this piece. If the era of duty-free, algorithmically driven, ultra-fast fashion has finally hit a regulatory and competitive wall, what exactly will the next evolution of global e-commerce have to look like to keep our prices low?
Thanks for listening. Follow us for daily insights into world affairs, and don't forget to like, comment, and share.